Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
He didn't leave because he felt nothing. That's the part nobody talks about honestly. Sometimes the coldest behavior comes from someone who felt too much too fast and didn't know what to do with it once it became real. Not movie real. Not fantasy real. I mean real in the uncomfortable way. The kind of real that makes a man suddenly quieter after a perfect night. The kind that makes him stare at his phone for 20 minutes, type something, delete it, then post a random story online pretending he's fine. And maybe you saw it happen. Maybe you watched him pull you close emotionally and then become strangely distant right after. Like intimacy flipped some hidden switch inside him. One minute he looked at you like he finally found home. The next minute he needed space. And the worst part is, part of him probably meant both. Because beneath a lot of masculine behavior people romanticize, judge, psychoanalyze, or turn it into spiritual poetry, there is often something much smaller, much sadder, much more human. A hidden wound he doesn't even fully understand himself. Not an excuse. Not a justification. Just a truth. And honestly, some men spend years running from it while pretending they're just busy, confused, or not ready. But late at night, when the distractions wear off, when the noise finally stops, it catches up to them, usually in silence. The strange thing is, most women can feel the shift before they can explain it. Not because they're crazy, not because they're overthinking, just because human beings notice small emotional absences long before language catches up to them. It starts with tiny things, almost embarrassingly tiny. The pause before he replies, the slightly flatter tone in his voice, the way he suddenly starts saying "I'm just tired" more often, the way he still texts "good morning," but somehow the warmth inside is missing. And if you've lived through this kind of connection before, you know exactly what I mean. Nothing technically changes at first, but emotionally, everything does. I remember this one night specifically because nothing dramatic even happened. That's what stayed with me. No argument, no betrayal, no explosion. Just silence slowly entering places where closeness used to live. She was sitting on the edge of the bed talking about something small. I don't even remember what now. Something about her coworker quitting. Something ordinary, human. The kind of conversation people have when they feel safe around each other. And he was listening, at least physically, but internally. You could almost feel him drifting somewhere else in real time. Like part of him suddenly became aware of how attached he was becoming. And instead of moving closer, his body reacted first. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Sometimes the body knows panic before the mind creates explanations for it. So he leaned back slightly, checked his phone even though no notification came through, started rubbing his hands together, looked toward the television for no reason. Tiny things. Tiny enough that if she brought them up later, he probably would have denied them immediately. You're imagining things. But she wasn't imagining it. Something had changed. And honestly, I think he felt it too. Which is why he became even more uncomfortable. Because now there were two realities happening at once. One part of him wanted to stay in the softness of the moment. Another part was already trying to emotionally escape it before it could ask more from him. That contradiction is so much uglier in real life than people make it sound online. People love simplifying men into villains or emotionally unavailable archetypes or runners or whatever label feels satisfying that week. But real avoidance is usually less dramatic than that. It's awkward, immature sometimes, quiet, It looks like a man staring at a text message too long because he suddenly feels pressure he doesn't understand. It looks like becoming weirdly formal after emotional intimacy. It looks like saying haha in texts where he used to say what he actually felt. And sometimes, it looks like a man creating emotional distance immediately after finally getting the closeness he thought he wanted. Which sounds insane until you experience it. I remember he started replying slower after that weekend together. Not dramatically slower, just enough for her nervous system to notice. 10 minutes became an hour. An hour became sorry, busy day. Then, eventually, conversations started feeling managed. Curated. Like he was carefully controlling how emotionally available he appeared at all times. And the painful part is, he probably didn't even fully realize he was doing it consciously. Some men don't wake up one day deciding to become emotionally distant. Sometimes distance is just the first survival reflex that appears when vulnerability starts feeling too real. Especially after intimacy. Especially after emotional safety. Especially after moments where someone sees them too clearly. Because being loved sounds beautiful until somebody actually starts noticing the parts of you you've spent years avoiding yourself. Then suddenly closeness doesn't just feel comforting. It feels exposing. And exposure does strange things to people. Especially men who learned early in life that emotional control equals safety. So now, he's sitting in his apartment 3 days later pretending everything is normal. Scrolling mindlessly. Watching half of a show without paying attention. Opening her message. Closing it. Opening Instagram instead. Not because he doesn't care. Honestly, sometimes because he cares too much. That's the confusing part. People assume emotional avoidance feels cold internally. A lot of the time it doesn't. A lot of the time it feels like internal static. Like overwhelm. Like your chest tightening over something that should make you happy. And because he doesn't understand the feeling, he translates it into something easier. I just need space. I think things are moving fast. I've been stressed lately. Maybe part of that is true, but not all of it. Not even close. The deeper truth is usually harder to admit. Something about being emotionally needed started scaring him. Not because she was too much, but because intimacy started activating parts of him he normally keeps under control. Need. Attachment. Dependence. Fear of disappointing someone. Fear of being seen failing in real time. And some men would rather disappear than let someone witness the confusion inside them. Even when they genuinely love the person. Especially then. That's another ugly truth nobody romanticizes correctly. The closer the emotional connection becomes, the more avoidance can intensify. Not always, but often enough. Because now the stakes feel real. Now losing her would hurt. Now disappointing her would hurt. Now being abandoned would hurt. Now he has something emotionally valuable sitting in front of him. And suddenly his nervous system starts treating love like risk instead of comfort. So he pulls away in small confusing ways. Not fully leaving. Not fully staying. Just enough distance to regulate himself. Which, unfortunately, creates the exact pain he claims he's trying to avoid. And she feels it. Of course she does. Women always talk themselves out of their intuition at first in situations like this. Maybe he's stressed. Maybe work is hard. Maybe I'm overthinking. Meanwhile, her body already knows. The emotional temperature changed. And once you feel that shift, it's almost impossible to unfeel it. I think one of the saddest parts is how ordinary these moments look from the outside. Nobody sees the real breaking point. It's not usually the final argument. It's the tiny invisible moment before that. The moment he stops relaxing fully into the connection. The moment self-protection quietly becomes stronger than emotional presence. Sometimes it happens right after a beautiful memory. That's what makes it so confusing. A perfect weekend, a vulnerable conversation, a long hug in the kitchen, falling asleep tangled together. Then suddenly, distance, and she starts replaying everything, trying to locate the exact second it changed. Was it something I said? Did I become too available? Did he lose feelings? Meanwhile, he's sitting alone feeling relief and grief at the exact same time, which is a miserable emotional combination people rarely talk about honestly. Relief because space calms his overwhelmed nervous system. Grief because distance from her already hurts. So now he's trapped between two conflicting emotional needs: the desire for closeness and the desire to escape the vulnerability closeness creates. And people behave strangely inside contradictions like that. They become inconsistent, hot and cold, present then distant, deep one night, detached the next morning. Not because they're masterminds manipulating emotions every second. Sometimes they're just emotionally unequipped. Sometimes they genuinely do not know how to stay emotionally regulated inside healthy intimacy. And honestly, that realization grew in a lot of black and white thinking for me. Because I used to think if someone pulled away, it automatically meant the feelings weren't real. Now, I think sometimes the feelings become real enough to terrify them, which doesn't excuse the damage, but it explains the confusion. I remember one specific detail she mentioned once. She said after they spent that deeply connected weekend together, he hugged her differently before leaving. Not colder exactly, just distracted. Like his mind was already somewhere else while his body was still holding her. And that detail bothered her for weeks. Because women notice things like that. The half-second hesitation. The emotional static behind the affection. The way someone says text me when you get home while already emotionally retreating internally. And honestly, he probably drove home feeling it too. Probably turned the music louder than usual. Probably checked his phone at red lights. Probably wanted reassurance while simultaneously avoiding it. That contradiction again. He misses her, so he creates distance. He wants closeness, so he withdraws from it. He feels deeply, so he suddenly acts emotionally unavailable. It sounds irrational because it is irrational. Human beings are irrational when fear gets attached to love. Especially people who learned that needing someone emotionally can eventually become dangerous. And the worst part, most men don't have language for any of this while it's happening. So instead they say things like, "I don't know what's wrong with me lately." And honestly, sometimes that's the truest sentence they say the entire time. I don't think people understand how many men are comfortable with almost love. The early part, the tension, the flirting, the chase, the late-night conversations that feel emotionally intimate but still contain an exit door somewhere. That part is manageable. There's still distance inside it. Still performance. Still room to disappear without completely collapsing emotionally. But then something shifts. Not dramatically, usually quietly. And suddenly the connection stops feeling hypothetical. Now she's not just someone exciting. She's becoming emotionally important. That's when things start getting strange. Because some men are perfectly functional right up until the moment they realize, oh shit, this person can actually hurt me. And that realization doesn't always create closeness. Sometimes it creates panic disguised as confusion. I remember this one guy, not even a bad person honestly, who used to call her every night without fail. Hours, talking about childhood memories, music, random stories from work. Stupid little things like what cereal they ate growing up. The kind of conversations that accidentally build attachment before either person admits it out loud. And he was consistent too. That's what made it confusing later. He initiated. He stayed up late. He remembered details. He'd sent pictures of random things during the day because they reminded him of her. At one point, he even said, half joking, "I think you're becoming part of my routine now." And she smiled when he said it. But I don't think he realized his body reacted to that sentence differently than hers did. For her, it felt comforting. For him, something tightened internally. Not instantly. Not enough to ruin the moment. Just enough. Enough that later that night, after the call ended, he stared at the ceiling feeling something he couldn't fully explain. Because routine sounds romantic until you realize it means someone matters now. Someone can affect your emotional state now. Someone can leave. And some men carry that awareness like a low-grade fever once attachment becomes real. So what do? Usually something subtle first. They slow the momentum down. Not consciously manipulative. More like emotional reflex. Maybe he waits a little longer before replying now. Maybe he suddenly becomes busy. Maybe conversations become less emotionally open. And the terrifying part is, he often does this while genuinely missing her. That contradiction destroys people emotionally because it makes no logical sense from the outside. How can someone miss you and avoid you at the same time? But emotionally, that happens constantly, especially in men who learned connection and emotional risk at the same time. I think people underestimate how many men secretly associate intimacy with pressure. Not love. Pressure. The pressure to maintain it, protect it, perform correctly inside it, not fail inside it. And if he already struggles with emotional shame quietly in the background, real intimacy starts exposing all of it. Now suddenly he notices every flaw in himself. His inconsistency, his emotional immaturity, his unresolved anger, his fear, his inability to communicate properly. Things he could previously ignore while relationships stayed surface level. But deep emotional closeness forces self-awareness, whether someone wants it or not. That's why some men look completely confident during pursuit, then emotionally unstable once the relationship becomes genuine. Pursuit is controlled. Real intimacy isn't. Real intimacy exposes. And exposure is unbearable for people who built their identity around appearing emotionally unaffected. I remember she once told him, "I feel safest when I'm with you." And he smiled when she said it. But later that night he went strangely quiet. She thought maybe she said too much. Maybe she scared him accidentally. And honestly, maybe she did. Not because her feelings were wrong, but because emotional responsibility suddenly became real to him in that moment. Now, he's no longer casually dating someone. Now, someone trusts him emotionally, depends on him emotionally, feels safe with him emotionally. And if he already carries private fears about failing people, that kind of closeness can activate panic instead of comfort. Nobody talks about this honestly enough. People assume emotionally avoidant behavior always comes from arrogance or lack of feeling. Sometimes it comes from emotional inadequacy. Sometimes the connection becomes so emotionally meaningful that it collides directly into every insecure part of him. So now he starts overthinking everything. How often should I text? Am I leading her on? What if I disappoint her later? What if I lose feelings eventually? What if she sees the parts of me I hide from everybody? And because he doesn't know how to process emotional vulnerability directly, he starts trying to regulate it indirectly by creating space, which usually confuses the hell out of the other person. because literally days earlier he was the one moving closer. That's the emotional whiplash of this kind of dynamic. One minute he's fully present. The next minute he sounds emotionally far away while saying things like, "I just need to think. I've had a lot on my mind lately. I don't know why I'm feeling weird." And honestly, sometimes he genuinely doesn't know. That's what makes it so tragic. People want clear villains, clear explanations, clear intentions. But human beings are messy, especially emotionally disconnected men trying to navigate genuine intimacy without emotional tools. Sometimes he isn't lying when he says he's confused. Sometimes the confusion is real, because part of him truly wants the connection, and another part associates emotional dependence with danger. So internally he starts splitting into. One version of him wants to call her, the other wants silence. One version misses her deeply, the other resents how emotionally affected he's becoming. One version imagines a future with her, the other feels trapped by the possibility of needing someone that much. And instead of admitting this contradiction honestly, he usually just withdraws, which hurts her more because now she's trying to decode behavior that even he barely understands himself. I remember one specific moment she described that stayed with me for a long time. She said they were in the grocery store together one evening, doing something painfully ordinary, arguing softly about pasta sauce brands, laughing about nothing, and suddenly she caught him looking at her in this strange, quiet way. Not lust, not infatuation exactly. Something softer, almost sad, like he accidentally realized how much he cared. And she said his whole energy changed after that. Not immediately, but slowly over the next week. That detail wrecked me a little because I think a lot of people have experienced that exact moment without realizing it. The moment someone stops feeling temporary, that's when fear enters. Not always consciously, sometimes just physically. The body starts scanning for escape routes before the mind forms a narrative. And men especially are taught to mistrust emotional vulnerability once it starts affecting their sense of control. So instead of leaning into intimacy, they intellectualize it. We're moving too fast. I need to focus on myself. I'm not ready for something serious. Again, sometimes those things are partially true, but partial truth can still hide deeper emotional reality, because occasionally what he really means is, I am terrified by how emotionally real this became. But that sentence requires vulnerability, self-awareness, emotional language, and many men simply do not have access to those skills in the moment. So the fear leaks out sideways instead, through distance, silence, inconsistency, emotional mixed signals. And the saddest part, a lot of them think creating distance will help them regain control emotionally. But usually the opposite happens. Now he can't focus properly. Music hits differently. Random memories interrupt his day. He checks her profile without interacting. Starts typing messages he never sends. Because avoidance doesn't erase attachment. It just delays confrontation with it. That's why some men become emotionally colder after intimacy instead of before it. Before intimacy, there's still emotional fantasy. After intimacy, there's emotional risk. Now the connection has weight, consequences, potential grief, and people do strange things when grief becomes possible, especially people who secretly believe they are safe or detached. There's another uncomfortable truth too. Some men only realize how attached they are after they start pulling away. Not during closeness, after, because distance removes distraction. Now, suddenly he notices her absence everywhere. The missing notifications, the quiet evenings, the lack of her voice in his routine. And instead of feeling relief, he feels emotionally haunted by the very closeness he ran from, which creates even more internal chaos, because now his actions and feelings no longer match at all. I wanted space. Do you? I thought I did. That's the kind of private conversation people rarely admit out loud, especially men trying to maintain the image that they're emotionally unaffected. But late at night, the performance usually cracks a little. That's when the truth starts surfacing in fragments, not dramatic revelations. Small, honest moments. Him replaying one sentence she said 3 weeks ago. Him opening old photos while pretending he was looking for something else. Him almost texting her after to drinks, then throwing the phone across the bed in frustration. Because now the connection is real. And real love, or almost love, exposes people in ways attraction never does. That's why some men seem emotionally fearless during pursuit, then suddenly become distant the moment the relationship starts feeling emotionally alive. Not because nothing was real. Sometimes because it became real enough to scare them. The strange thing about emotionally disconnected men is, a lot of them genuinely don't think anything bad enough happened to them. That's important. Because when people hear the word trauma, they imagine catastrophe, violence, abandonment, chaos, screaming, broken homes. And yes, sometimes it was the obvious. But sometimes the wound was quieter. Sometimes it looked like growing up in a house where nobody asked how you felt unless your feelings became inconvenient. Sometimes it looked like a father who provided financially, but emotionally felt 1,000 miles away even while sitting in the same room. Sometimes it looked like learning very early that sadness made people uncomfortable. So eventually, you stop showing it. Not dramatically, not consciously, just gradually, the way boys do. I remember talking to a man once who kept insisting he had a normal childhood. And honestly, maybe compared to some people, he did. No major abuse. No horrifying stories. No huge tragedy. But while he talked, these tiny details kept slipping out accidentally. His father never apologized. His mother only gave affection when he achieved something. Nobody talked about emotions unless someone was angry. Crying got called dramatic. Fear got mocked. Vulnerability got ignored. And the weird part, he said all of this while shrugging, like it was completely ordinary. Maybe it was ordinary. That's the problem. A lot of emotionally wounded men were raised inside environments where emotional neglect was normalized so deeply that they don't even recognize it as neglect. They just call it being raised to be strong. But strength and emotional suppression are not always the same thing. Sometimes they look identical at first though, especially in boys. A boy learns quickly what gets approval. Being easy, being tough, being low maintenance, not needing too much emotionally. And eventually he becomes a man who prides himself on independence while quietly feeling disconnected from his own emotional reality, which works fine until intimacy enters the picture. That's when all the old survival strategies start malfunctioning, because real emotional closeness requires things he was never taught how to do safely. Stay present during vulnerability. Express emotional needs directly. Receive love without suspicion. Depend on someone without shame. And if those things were never emotionally modeled for him growing up, relationships start activating confusion he doesn't have language for. I think about this one memory someone told me once. He was maybe 8 years old. He fell off his bike pretty badly in front of his dad. Nothing life-threatening, just enough to hurt. And before he could even process the pain, his father looked at him and said, "Get up, you're fine." That sentence sounds harmless to most people. Tiny moment. Forgettable even. But children build emotional identities out of moments exactly like that. Because what he heard wasn't, "You'll survive." What he absorbed was, "Pain should be hidden quickly." Vulnerability creates discomfort. Emotional reassurance will not arrive. So now fast forward 20 years. He's sitting across from a woman he genuinely loves. She asks, "What are you feeling right now?" And his body reacts like the question itself is dangerous. Not because she's dangerous, because emotional exposure still feels unsafe at a cellular level. So instead he says, "I don't know." And honestly, sometimes he really doesn't know. That's the heartbreaking part. People assume emotional unavailability is always intentional withholding. Sometimes it's emotional illiteracy. Sometimes nobody ever taught him how to identify what's happening inside himself beyond anger, stress, hunger, attraction, or numbness. Everything softer got buried early. Not because he was evil, because he adapted. And adaptation can look incredibly functional from the outside. A lot of emotionally avoidant men are highly competent people, reliable at work, calm under pressure, good problem solvers, independent, but emotionally, they're surviving relationships using tools built for emotional self-protection, not intimacy. That's why closeness starts feeling overwhelming faster than it should. Every vulnerable moment activates old conditioning quietly in the background. She says, "You can talk to me," but internally something else is louder. "Don't be weak. Don't lose control. Don't need too much. Don't let someone affect you completely." So now he's trapped between emotional longing and emotional conditioning, which creates exhausting contradictions. He wants closeness deeply, but starts shutting down once he receives it consistently. He wants emotional safety, but mistrusts it once it appears. He wants to be understood, but hides the very parts that need understanding. And none of this looks poetic in real life, by the way. It looks awkward. A man going quiet during important conversations. A man changing the subject with humor. A man suddenly focusing on work after emotional intimacy. A man saying, "I'm just tired," because he literally cannot explain the emotional overwhelm happening inside him. I think one of the saddest things is how many men confuse emotional numbness with maturity. Because numbness feels controlled, predictable, safe, and a lot of boys got rewarded for appearing emotionally controlled long before they understood what emotional regulation actually was. So they grow into men who can suppress emotion beautifully, until love reaches places suppression can no longer manage cleanly. Then suddenly strange behaviors emerge. Distance, withdrawal, irritability, silence, emotional inconsistency. Not because love isn't there. Sometimes because love is colliding directly into years of unresolved emotional survival patterns. I remember one guy describing a breakup once, and the way he talked about it stayed with me. He said, "She kept asking me to open up emotionally." Then he laughed awkwardly and added, "I honestly didn't even know what she wanted from me." That sentence sounds defensive at first, but underneath it was something sadder. He genuinely lacked emotional reference points. Nobody had ever asked him emotional questions growing up. Nobody sat with his feelings patiently. Nobody taught him emotional reflection. Nobody modeled repair after conflict. So now intimacy feels like taking a test for a subject he never learned. And because shame enters quickly for men around emotional inadequacy, avoidance becomes easier than exposure. That's another thing people misunderstand. A lot of emotional withdrawal is shame management, not always lack of care. Sometimes he pulls away because he feels incapable, inadequate, emotionally clumsy, and rather than risk failing visibly inside intimacy, he creates distance where his inadequacy can't be examined too closely, which unfortunately hurts the other person deeply, because from her perspective, it feels personal. She thinks he stopped caring. Meanwhile, internally, he may be thinking, I don't know how to do this right. But pride rarely allows men to admit that sentence out loud. Especially men taught their worth comes from competence. So instead they disappear into work, distraction, routine, silence, anything that restores emotional control. I've noticed something else too. Men who grew up emotionally unseen often become deeply uncomfortable being truly known later in life. At first they crave it. The attention, the warmth, the emotional intimacy. But once someone starts seeing beyond the surface, panic quietly enters. Because now they feel emotionally exposed in ways they can't manage through performance anymore. She notices his mood shifts, his avoidance, his shutdowns, his fear, and instead of feeling relieved to be understood, part of him feels trapped by visibility. That's why some men become colder exactly when emotional intimacy becomes safer. Safety sounds beautiful theoretically, but for emotionally guarded people, safety also removes hiding places. And hiding places are emotionally addictive when you've lived inside them your whole life. I remember this tiny story someone shared online once. A woman said her partner would always leave the room whenever she cried. Not aggressively, not angrily. He just physically could not stay present. At first, she thought he didn't care. Later, he admitted quietly, I never saw emotions handled calmly growing up. I don't know what to do when someone cries. That sentence wrecked me a little, because suddenly his behavior looked different. Still painful, still harmful even, but human. That's the word I keep coming back to. Human, not monster, not mastermind, not emotionally evil, just emotionally unequipped in ways that create damage anyway. And unfortunately, love does not automatically heal emotional conditioning. Sometimes love exposes it. Sometimes intimacy forces buried wounds to the surface so fast that people start sabotaging the very connection they prayed for 2 months earlier. Because emotionally neglected boys often become men who crave love desperately, while simultaneously fearing the emotional dependency attached to it. So they live in contradiction, wanting closeness, resisting closeness, missing someone while avoiding them, needing reassurance while pretending not to care. And the older they get, the harder it becomes to admit how scared they actually are underneath all the self-control. Sometimes I think the hidden wound behind a lot of masculine behavior is painfully simple. A boy learned very early, being emotionally vulnerable does not feel safe. And years later, his adult relationships are still paying the price for a lesson he never consciously chose to learn. One of the most confusing things about emotionally avoidant men is this. Sometimes they become distant immediately after the exact moment you thought brought you closer. And I don't mean after conflict. I mean after tenderness, after the good night, after the vulnerable conversation, after the weekend that felt emotionally real, after the moment where he looked at you in that quiet and guarded way that made you think. There you are. Then suddenly, he changes. Not fully. Not enough for you to explain it clearly to your friends without sounding dramatic. Just enough to make your stomach feel weird. And honestly, I think that emotional shift confuses him to sometimes. Because people assume emotional withdrawal always feels intentional internally. A lot of the time it doesn't. A lot of the time it feels like emotional overload. Like his nervous system hit a limit his mind didn't prepare for. I remember someone describing it once in a way that stayed with me. She said, It was like every time we got emotionally closer, he'd disappear a little afterward. That sentence felt painfully accurate. Because some men can tolerate desire more easily than intimacy. Desire is exciting. Intimacy is exposing. Desire lets him feel powerful. Intimacy makes him feel emotionally visible. And visibility changes everything, especially for men who build their identity around emotional control. So now maybe they've just spent an entire night together. The kind of night people replay afterward privately. Soft conversation in the dark. Her head on his chest. Long silences that didn't feel uncomfortable. The accidental honesty that slips out around 2 a.m. Maybe he even opened up more than usual. Said things he normally avoids saying. About childhood. Fear. Loneliness. His past relationship. The parts of himself he usually keeps managed carefully. And in the moment, it felt safe. That's the dangerous part. Because emotional safety can feel intoxicating initially to someone who's been emotionally guarded their whole life. But afterward comes the crush. And nobody talks about the crush enough. The emotional hangover after intimacy. The strange coldness that sometimes appears not because the connection lacked depth, but because it had too much. So now he wakes up the next morning and something inside him feels off. Not regret exactly, more like internal exposure. Like he accidentally left emotional doors open too long. And instead of sitting calmly with vulnerability, his nervous system starts trying to regain equilibrium, which often looks like emotional distance. Suddenly he's checking his phone more, talking less, acting strangely practical. You can literally watch some men emotionally retreat in real time after closeness. Not because they plan to manipulate anyone, because vulnerability activated fear faster than they expected. And unfortunately, most men do not have language for nervous system overwhelm. So they translate it into logic. I just need space. I've been in my head. I'm stressed. Meanwhile, the deeper truth sounds more like, that level of emotional closeness scared me more than I want to admit. But that sentence feels too exposing. So instead he withdraws quietly and hopes the feeling settles itself. Sometimes he even believes distance will help him regain emotional clarity. But distance often creates something worse. Now he misses her while actively avoiding her, which is such a psychologically miserable experience. Especially because from the outside, it makes absolutely no sense. I remember this one internal dialogue someone described after pulling away from a woman he genuinely loved. He missed her. Then why didn't he call? Because missing her made it worse. That's it. That's the contradiction right there. Missing her intensified vulnerability. Vulnerability intensified emotional overwhelm. Overwhelm triggered withdrawal. So instead of moving toward comfort, he moved toward distance. Human beings do this constantly when emotional safety feels unfamiliar, especially emotionally avoidant men. And honestly, some of the behaviors that happen after intimacy are almost painfully immature when you look at them closely. A grown man suddenly hyper-focusing on work after a deeply emotional weekend. Cleaning the apartment obsessively instead of responding emotionally. Going to the gym twice in one day because movement feels safer than feeling. Replying with dry one-word texts after crying in someone's arms 2 nights earlier. And the woman experiences emotional whiplash trying to understand how both versions of him exist simultaneously. But they do. That's the uncomfortable truth. Part of him genuinely felt connected. Another part immediately feared what that connection now meant. Because intimacy creates emotional responsibility. Now someone can hurt him. Now he can disappoint someone. Now there's something real to lose. And for men who associate emotional dependence with danger, love itself starts activating survival behavior. I think people underestimate how physical emotional avoidance actually is. It's not always some conscious strategic decision. Sometimes his body is reacting before his thoughts fully catch up. Chest tightness, restlessness, mental fog, sudden exhaustion, irritability after closeness, the urge to isolate. And because most men are not taught emotional body awareness, they misinterpret what's happening. They think, maybe I'm losing feelings. Maybe something's wrong. Maybe this relationship is becoming too much. When sometimes the reality is simply, their nervous system does not know how to remain relaxed inside consistent intimacy. That's very different. But it doesn't feel different internally when you lack emotional self-awareness. So now he starts creating space to calm himself down. Less texting, delayed responses, acting emotionally casual. Not realizing the distance itself is creating anxiety for both people now. I remember this woman talking about the first time she noticed it clearly. She said after one particularly intimate night together, he became unusually quiet the next day. Not mean, not cruel, just emotionally unreachable somehow. She asked if he was okay, and he immediately said, "Yeah, I'm fine." But she could feel he wasn't. So she tried again later, and this time he got slightly irritated. Not explosive, just defensive in that subtle masculine way. I said I'm okay. That moment stayed with her for months because she realized he sounded almost angry at the fact that she noticed his emotional shift. And honestly, he probably was. Because being emotionally seen after intimacy can feel terrifying for emotionally guarded people. Now she's not only close to him, she's perceiving him accurately. That level of visibility creates panic in people who survive life through emotional self-containment. So they start reaching for control again. And control can look cold. That's why some men suddenly become hyper-independent after emotional closeness. They need to restore the feeling that they still belong to themselves emotionally. Which sounds harsh, but underneath it is usually fear. Fear of engulfment. Fear of dependency. Fear of emotional exposure. Fear that love will eventually demand parts of them they don't know how to give safely. So instead of admitting vulnerability honestly, they create emotional static, mixed signals, distance, confusion, and the woman often starts blaming herself because the timing feels so emotionally cruel. How did we go from closeness to this? But intimacy itself was the trigger. Not because intimacy was bad, because intimacy activated unresolved fear. That's why emotionally avoidant men often seem safest during emotional distance and most unstable during actual closeness. Distance allows emotional regulation. Closeness activates attachment. And attachment activates every buried fear underneath it. Especially if love was historically connected to pain, unpredictability, criticism, shame, or emotional inconsistency growing up. Then, suddenly healthy intimacy feels emotionally disorganizing instead of calming. I remember one man admitting something painfully honest after sabotaging a relationship. He said, "The more she loved me calmly, the more anxious I became." That sentence haunted me a little, because most people imagine love soothing emotional wounds automatically. But sometimes healthy love exposes how unfamiliar emotional safety actually feels. And unfamiliar safety can feel emotionally threatening at first, especially for men who are used to chaos, emotional suppression, or self-protection. So after intimacy, they unconsciously create distance to stabilize themselves internally, not realizing they are slowly destabilizing the relationship itself. And the tragedy is, a lot of these men truly believe they just need more time alone to figure things out. Meanwhile, the silence starts damaging the connection quietly in the background. because now she feels abandoned emotionally. He feels overwhelmed emotionally, and neither person fully understands what's happening in real time. So they start misreading each other. She thinks, he doesn't care like I do. He thinks, I care too much and it's freaking me out. But he rarely says that part out loud. Instead, he becomes quieter, colder, more distant after moments that should have brought intimacy deeper, which creates one of the most painful emotional contradictions in relationships. The person who felt safest emotionally for a brief moment becomes the exact person he suddenly feels the urge to escape from afterward. Not because she became unsafe, because intimacy uncovered how unsafe vulnerability still feels inside him. One of the loneliest things about certain men is how hard they work to appear affected, even when they're falling apart internally, especially then. And I don't think most of them fully realize they're performing anymore. It becomes automatic after a while. The delayed reply, the casual tone, the carefully controlled facial expression, the pretending not to notice her absence while quietly rearranging their entire evening around it. Because somewhere along the way, a lot of men learn that emotional control equals dignity. Neediness feels humiliating. Longing feels embarrassing. Missing someone to openly feels weak. So instead of expressing pain directly, they perform indifference, which honestly creates some of the most emotionally confusing behavior imaginable. Because externally he looks detached, internally he's replaying one sentence she said 3 weeks ago while standing in line at a gas station. I remember someone describing this period after a breakup once, and it felt painfully real. He said during the day he acted completely normal, went to work, joked with co-workers, posted stories online, answered texts. Meanwhile, every quiet moment in between felt unbearable. Driving home after work was the worst part. No distractions, no noise. Just him and his own thoughts finally catching up. And suddenly tiny memories started attacking him out of nowhere. The way she used to touch his arm while laughing. The sound of dishes in her apartment kitchen. The weird little voice she used when she was half asleep. That's the kind of grief people don't post online. Not dramatic suffering, just emotionally inconvenient haunting. And instead of admitting he missed her, he doubled down on looking fine. That's the performance. The performance of being good, focused, unbothered. Meanwhile, his body was betraying him constantly, checking her profile, opening old messages, typing responses in his notes app he never sent. One man admitted he used to mute her stories, then manually search her name anyway. That level of contradiction feels almost pathetic when spoken out loud. But human beings do pathetic things when they're emotionally overwhelmed. Especially people trying desperately to maintain pride while attachment quietly destroys them. And masculine pride around emotional need is such a strange thing to watch closely. Because a lot of men genuinely crave emotional closeness. Deeply. But once they feel emotionally dependent on someone, shame enters the experience almost immediately. Not always consciously. Just this uncomfortable internal awareness of, she affects me too much. And instead of softening into that realization, they often resist it, fight it, hide it, minimize it. I think that's why some men become emotionally colder exactly when they care the most. Because now there's something to lose. Now her silence changes his mood. Now her distance hurts. Now her attention matters. And dependence terrifies people who build their identity around self-sufficiency. So now he starts doing strange little things to restore emotional control. Waiting before replying even though he saw the message immediately. Acting overly casual in conversations. Pretending he's less emotionally invested than he really is. And honestly, some of it is intentional. That's another uncomfortable truth. Sometimes he knows exactly what he's doing, not in some evil mastermind way, more like emotional self-protection mixed with pride. He thinks, if I act too interested, I'll lose control. If she sees how much I care, I'll become vulnerable. If I stay detached, I'll stay safe. Meanwhile, he's lying awake at 1:17 a.m. rereading old conversations. Human beings are ridiculous like that. I remember one woman saying, he acted like I was bothering him, but he watched every single story within seconds. And honestly, that sentence alone explains so much modern emotional behavior. Watching from distance, observing without engaging, wanting emotional connection without emotional exposure. Because exposure is the real fear underneath all of this. Not love itself. Exposure. The possibility that someone could see how emotionally affected he actually is. That's why some men become weirdly performative round friends after heartbreak too. Extra detached, extra casual, almost aggressively unaffected. She was cool, but it is what it is. Meanwhile, later that same night, he's sitting in his parked car staring at a text draft he keeps deleting. There's something deeply sad about watching someone try to outrun their own emotional reality through image management, especially because the performance rarely fools the people closest to them. Women usually feel the contradiction immediately. She notices the dry texting paired with constant attention, the emotional distance paired with subtle jealousy, the silence paired with online presence. And it creates emotional confusion because the signals conflict constantly. One part of him is withdrawing. Another part keeps reaching back unconsciously. That's why emotionally avoidant behavior can feel so psychologically destabilizing to experience. Because the emotional truth leaks out in fragments even while the person tries to suppress it. He says he needs space, but watches everything she posts. He acts detached, but remembers tiny details she mentioned casually weeks ago. He stops reaching out, but keeps finding indirect ways to feel connected to her existence. And honestly, some men hate themselves a little while doing this, because internally they know the contradiction makes no sense. I remember reading a comment once where a man admitted, I kept hoping she'd text me first, so I wouldn't have to risk rejection. That sentence felt painfully honest. Because beneath a lot of masculine emotional distancing is fear disguised as pride. Fear of being ignored. Fear of looking desperate. Fear of being emotionally exposed without reassurance. So instead of communicating directly, they create these strange emotional stalemates. Waiting games. Silence battles. Passive observation. Both people hurting. Neither person saying the vulnerable thing first. And the longer it goes on, the harder honesty becomes. Because now ego enters. Now shame enters. Now he's embarrassed by how emotionally affected he became in the first place. So instead of admitting, I miss you, he posts gym photos, works longer hours, acts emotionally unavailable, and sometimes he even convinces himself the performance is real temporarily. That's another thing people misunderstand. Emotional suppression can feel convincing for short periods. Distraction works until it doesn't, until some random ordinary moment cracks everything open again. As sung in a grocery store, her favorite snack at a gas station, hearing someone laugh like her from across a room. Then suddenly all the emotion he tried controlling comes flooding back inconveniently. Usually when he's alone, that's when the performance starts slipping. Late at night mostly. That vulnerable are where pride weakens a little. Where he finally admits things internally he'd never say out loud during the day. She mattered more than I admitted. I handled that badly. I miss her. I don't even know why I pushed her away. But morning comes. The phone stays silent, and the performance starts again. That cycle can go on for months sometimes, especially for men who associate vulnerability with loss of identity. Because being emotionally affected by someone threatens the image they built of themselves. The calm one, the detached one, the emotionally controlled one. So now they're grieving privately while publicly pretending they've moved on effortlessly. And honestly, it looks exhausting. I think one of the saddest details is how often emotionally avoidant men try to reconnect indirectly instead of honestly. Sending random memes after weeks of silence. Reacting to stories instead of having conversations. Finding excuses to reach out that avoid emotional accountability completely. Not because they don't care enough for honesty, because honesty feels too exposing now, too irreversible, too real. So they test emotional waters sideways instead, little breadcrumbs of contact. Meanwhile, the deeper truth sits underneath all of it quietly. I still care. I just don't know how to return without confronting myself too. And confronting themselves is the part many men avoid longest. Because eventually they have to face the reality that the distance wasn't protecting them nearly as much as they thought. It was just delaying vulnerability while creating loneliness. And loneliness has a way of becoming louder once the distractions stop working. That's when the emotional performance starts cracking in private. Not publicly, not dramatically, just in small human moments. Him opening her chat, then locking the phone again. Him hearing her favorite song and instantly feeling angry for no reason. Him pretending not to care while secretly hoping she still thinks about him too. And honestly, sometimes she does. That's what makes the whole thing so painfully unnecessary sometimes. To people missing each other. To people waiting. To people performing emotional control while silently hoping the other person breaks first. But pride can keep lonely people apart for a very long time. Especially men who learned early that emotional needs should always be hidden behind composure. At first, the distance feels manageable. That's the dangerous part. The silence almost feels like relief in the beginning. No emotionally intense conversations. No vulnerability. No pressure to explain himself. No feeling exposed all the time. Just space. And for a while, he mistakes emotional numbness for peace. He starts convincing himself maybe this is what he needed all along. More independence. More control. Less emotional chaos. Maybe he even tells himself, "This is healthier. I can think clearly again. I was getting too emotionally wrapped up." And honestly, for the first week or two, he might actually believe that. Because avoidance gives immediate short-term relief. That's why people do it. Distance lowers emotional intensity temporarily, but eventually, the distractions stop working properly. And that's usually when the nights become unbearable. Not every night. That's important. It's random at first. Sneaky. He'll be completely fine all day. Busy. Functional. Productive. Then suddenly it's 11:48 p.m. And for no obvious reason, something inside him collapses a little. Maybe it starts in silence. That heavy silence certain apartments have at night when the television's off and even the refrigerator sounds too loud. Maybe he's sitting on the couch scrolling mindlessly through videos he's not actually watching. Maybe he's exhausted, but avoids sleeping because sleeping means being alone with his own thoughts for another hour first. That's when memories start slipping through the cracks. Not dramatic memories either. Tiny ones. Annoyingly tiny. The way she used to steal fries off his plate without asking. The sound of her bracelets hitting the bathroom counter. The exact tone of voice she used when she said his name softly. And those details hit harder than the big memories sometimes. because they feel alive, specific, irreplaceable. I think people underestimate how physical grief becomes once emotional avoidance wears off, especially for men who suppress emotions during the day. At night, the body remembers everything the mind tried managing. Suddenly, his chest feels tight for no reason. His stomach drops randomly. He feels restless, agitated. So he gets up, walks around the apartment, checks his phone, opens the fridge even though he isn't hungry. Human beings do strange little rituals when they're trying not to feel something. I remember someone saying after his breakup, he started cleaning obsessively at 1 a.m. Not because he cared about cleanliness, because movement distracted him from missing her. So there he is wiping already clean kitchen counters while replaying conversations from months ago, thinking about one specific moment over and over, usually something small. That's another thing nobody prepares you for. The brain rarely obsesses over the important moments afterward. It fixates on the ordinary ones, the grocery store trips, the lazy Sunday mornings, the stupid inside jokes, because those moments carried emotional safety without him realizing it at the time. And now they haunt him quietly. I think the worst nights are the ones where regret arrives slowly instead of dramatically. Not cinematic heartbreak, just gradual awareness. Like, oh, she really mattered to me. That realization tends to arrive late for emotionally avoidant men. Sometimes painfully late. Because distance delays emotional processing. It doesn't erase it. Eventually, the emotional reality catches up anyway. Usually in silence. Usually alone. I remember this one story someone shared that felt painfully specific. He said he was driving home late after work one night. Nothing unusual. Just another drive. Then a song came on, not even their song, which somehow made it worse. And suddenly he remembered this tiny moment of her laughing in the passenger seat months earlier because he missed an exit while talking. That was it. Nothing profound. But he had to pull over because the grief hit him so physically out of nowhere. That's how unresolved attachment works sometimes. Not through grand revelations, through emotional ambushes. And the really difficult part, by this point, he often misses her deeply while still resisting vulnerability. So now he's emotionally trapped between longing and pride, which creates this awful internal stalemate. Text her. No. You miss her. I know. Then why are you sitting here suffering instead? Because what if she's moved on? What if I hurt her too much already? What if I don't even know how to explain myself? That last one matters more than people realize. A lot of emotionally avoidant men genuinely do not know how to explain what happened internally. They just know they pulled away, went cold, got overwhelmed, created distance. And now they're sitting alone realizing the silence didn't protect them emotionally nearly as much as they expected. Sometimes it made things worse. Because now there's no distraction from themselves anymore. No relationship dynamic to focus on. No emotional tension. No texting. No conflict. Just the uncomfortable truth of their own emotional reality finally surfacing. And honestly, that's when shame enters heavily. Not just sadness. Shame. Shame for hurting someone who cared. Shame for becoming emotionally inconsistent. Shame for missing someone they pushed away themselves. That emotional contradiction eats people alive quietly, especially men raised to believe they should always feel emotionally certain and controlled. But real attachment rarely feels controlled. Sometimes it feels humiliating, messy, contradictory. I remember someone admitting he used to check her social media every single night before sleeping, even though he was the one who stopped communicating consistently. That kind of behavior sounds irrational until you understand avoidance and the absence of feeling. Sometimes it's the inability to tolerate feeling fully. So now he's emotionally starving himself while pretending he chose peace. And the body notices eventually. Sleep gets weird. Concentration drops. Small things irritate him more. People around him might not even realize what's happening because externally he still functions. That's another thing about men. A lot of them suffer very quietly, not gracefully, not wisely, just silently, still going to work, still answering emails, still joking around with friends. Meanwhile, internally they're replaying old conversations during traffic lights. I think nighttime loneliness hits emotionally avoidant men differently because there's nobody left to perform for. During the day, they can still maintain the image. Busy, focused, detached, but alone at night, the performance weakens. That's when the emotional truth starts surfacing in uncomfortable fragments. He misses her morning texts. He misses being emotionally known. He misses the version of himself that existed around her. That last part hurts more than people expect sometimes, because certain relationships soften people emotionally in ways they only recognize after losing them. Now, he notices how emotionally flat everything else feels. The conversations, the dating apps, the casual interactions. Nothing carries the same emotional weight anymore. And instead of admitting grief directly, he often tries distracting himself harder. More work, more scrolling, more gym sessions, more noise. But grief has patience. Eventually, it waits for silence again. I think one of the cruelest parts is how memory becomes sensory after loss. Not intellectual. Sensory. The smell of her shampoo on an old hoodie. A voice that sounds vaguely like hers in public. Seeing her favorite drink at a convenience store. And suddenly the body reacts before logic can intervene. Chest tightening. Heart racing slightly. That horrible sinking feeling in the stomach. All from tiny, ordinary things. Because emotionally significant people leave fingerprints on mundane parts of life. And once they're gone, those ordinary details become emotional landmines. I remember one man admitting something that felt brutally honest. He said, "I kept waiting to stop caring naturally, but instead the silence just made me think about her more." That's the thing avoidance rarely predicts. Distance removes stimulation. And without stimulation, end result, emotion gets louder, especially at night. Especially during lonely drives, empty apartments, quiet weekends. That's when he starts remembering not just her, but himself around her. The version of him that laughed more easily, opened up accidentally, felt emotionally alive instead of emotionally managed all the time. And now grief becomes more complicated because he's not only missing a person, he's missing emotional access to parts of himself too, which creates this quiet ache he struggles explaining even internally. So instead he just sits there some nights, phone in hand, ego exhausted, heart heavy, still not texting her. That's the part people rarely understand from the outside. Sometimes silence isn't emotional absence. Sometimes silence is a war happening inside someone too emotionally unequipped to bridge the distance they created. And by the time they finally understand what they lost, they're no longer fighting only fear. Now they're fighting regret too. I think one of the hardest truths to admit about emotional avoidance is this. Sometimes he knew she was hurting, and he still stayed silent. Not because he enjoyed hurting her. Not because he felt nothing, but because avoidance can make people incredibly selfish while they're trying to survive their own emotional overwhelm. That's the part people struggle hearing. Because we want pain to automatically create empathy. We want suffering to make people emotionally responsible. But sometimes emotionally overwhelmed people become more self-protective instead, more avoidant, more passive, more emotionally dishonest, especially when guilt enters the picture. And guilt enters quickly once he realizes the distance is affecting her deeply. I remember one woman describing how her entire body started reacting to his inconsistency before her mind fully accepted what was happening. She stopped sleeping properly, started checking her phone constantly, started rereading conversations trying to locate the exact moment things shifted. Meanwhile, he knew something was wrong. Of course he knew. People love pretending emotionally avoidant men are completely oblivious. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them notice everything. The shorter replies, the emotional tension, the sadness underneath her "I'm okay," the way her energy changes after being emotionally neglected repeatedly. They notice. Sometimes they just don't know how to face what they're causing without confronting themselves too. So instead, they delay. And honestly, delay can become its own form of cruelty. Not intentional cruelty necessarily, but still painful, still damaging. Because now she's trapped in emotional ambiguity, not fully abandoned, not fully reassured, just emotionally suspended. And suspended grief does something terrible to people psychologically. It keeps hope alive while slowly exhausting the nervous system at the same time. That's why inconsistency hurts differently than rejection sometimes. At least rejection ends uncertainty. Avoidance stretches uncertainty into weeks, months, tiny mixed signals, small moments of warmth followed by silence again. And the person receiving it starts losing emotional footing. I remember someone saying, the worst part wasn't him leaving, it was him acting like he might come back every few days. That sentence stayed with me because it captures the emotional confusion perfectly. A random check-in text, watching every story, liking old photos suddenly, sending a meme after disappearing emotionally for 2 weeks. Just enough contact to reopen emotional attachment, not enough honesty to create stability. And honestly, sometimes he's doing it because he misses her. Sometimes because he feels guilty. Sometimes because loneliness hits him temporarily. Sometimes because he wants reassurance she still cares. Human motivation is messy like that. Not every action comes from one clean emotional truth. Sometimes several contradictory needs exist simultaneously. I don't want commitment, but I don't want to lose her either. I need space. But why does her silence hurt so much? I care about her. Then why am I acting like this? That internal fragmentation creates behaviors that feel emotionally cruel even when the intention underneath isn't malicious. And I think that's important to admit honestly, because emotional avoidance can absolutely wound people deeply even when the avoidant person is suffering too. Pain does not cancel impact. Fear does not erase responsibility. That's the difficult part. I think some men secretly hope time will solve emotional problems they are too afraid to address directly. If they wait long enough, maybe emotions will settle naturally. Maybe she'll stop needing clarity. Maybe the tension will somehow disappear on its own. But unresolved emotional pain rarely disappears quietly. Usually it mutates into anxiety, resentment, confusion, emotional exhaustion, especially for the person left trying to interpret silence. I remember one guy admitting something painfully honest after months of emotionally distancing himself from someone he loved. He said, "I kept thinking I'd respond properly once I figured myself out. But weeks kept passing, then months, and eventually shame made reaching out feel even harder. Because now he wasn't just someone confused. Now he was someone who had already hurt her repeatedly." That's another hidden layer people don't talk about enough. Avoidance creates accumulating shame. The longer silence continues, the heavier accountability feels. So now, even a simple text starts feeling emotionally loaded. What do you even say after disappearing emotionally? How do you explain behavior you barely understand yourself? How do you admit, I cared about you deeply and still handled it terribly? A lot of men avoid that conversation because they genuinely cannot tolerate the guilt attached to it. So instead they continue avoiding, which creates more guilt, which creates more avoidance. And suddenly months have passed inside a cycle that started with emotional overwhelm and slowly turned into emotional cowardice. That word matters. Cowardice. Not because he's evil, not because he's heartless, because sometimes avoidance becomes a refusal to face the emotional consequences of your own behavior honestly. And I think emotionally avoidant men know this deep down more often than people realize. That's why some of them become defensive when confronted gently. Not because the other person is wrong, because the truth already hurts internally. I remember a woman saying she once calmly asked, "Why do you keep pulling away after getting close to me?" And instead of answering, he got irritated. Started talking about stress, work, timing, anything except the actual emotional reality underneath. Later, she realized he looked less angry at her and more angry at himself. That happens a lot because emotionally avoidant people often experience vulnerability and shame simultaneously. So instead of opening emotionally, they protect themselves through distance, logic, or irritation. Meanwhile, the other person feels emotionally abandoned trying to understand what happened. And honestly, some men know exactly how damaging their inconsistency becomes. They just feel emotionally incapable of stopping the pattern in real time. That's another painful truth. Awareness alone does not automatically create emotional courage. A person can know they're hurting someone and still freeze emotionally, still avoid difficult conversations, still disappear, still delay honesty. I think one of the cruelest parts is when he continues seeking emotional comfort from her while refusing emotional responsibility toward her. That dynamic destroys people slowly. He reaches out when lonely, pulls away when intimacy returns, comes closer when afraid of losing her, retreats again when closeness feels real. And because there are genuine feelings underneath it, the connection becomes incredibly hard for her to let go of completely. That's what makes emotionally avoidant dynamics psychologically addictive sometimes. Intermittent warmth. Moments where the real him appears again briefly. The softness. The honesty. The emotional openness she remembers. Then suddenly it disappears again. And she starts emotionally surviving off fragments. A good conversation here. A vulnerable moment there. A random affectionate text after days of silence. Meanwhile, her nervous system is slowly deteriorating from instability. And somewhere deep down, he often knows this. Not fully, not constantly, but enough. Enough to feel guilt when he sees her sadness. Enough to notice her emotional exhaustion. Enough to recognize the disappointment in her voice eventually. I think people underestimate how painful it is for emotionally avoidant men to witness the damage they cause once they genuinely care about someone. Because now they're trapped in another contradiction. They want closeness, but their behavior keeps creating pain around closeness. And eventually some men start believing, maybe I'm just bad for her, which sounds self-aware on the surface, but sometimes becomes another form of avoidance too. Because believing you're incapable of healthy love can feel emotionally easier than learning how to participate in it differently. Growth requires vulnerability, accountability, communication, consistency. And those things terrify emotionally guarded people precisely because they remove emotional escape routes. I remember someone admitting, I thought avoiding conflict was protecting us. I didn't realize silence was becoming the conflict. That sentence felt devastatingly accurate. Because silence is not neutral in emotionally intimate relationships. Silence communicates. Distance communicates. Inconsistency communicates. Even when no words are spoken. And unfortunately, the message often received is, "You are emotionally alone here." That's why emotional avoidance hurts so deeply. Not just because someone leaves, but because they slowly stop emotionally showing up while physically or psychologically hovering nearby. Close enough to feel, too far to trust. And the longer that dynamic continues, the more emotionally disoriented both people become. Because now he's suffering privately. She's suffering openly. Neither person feels emotionally safe anymore. And still, sometimes he says nothing. Not because there's nothing inside him, but because by now the truth feels enormous. Too tangled. Too overdue. Too emotionally exposing. So he waits again, hoping maybe timing will solve what honesty requires. Meanwhile, the connection slowly collapses under the weight of everything neither person fully knows how to say. I think one of the most misunderstood things about emotionally avoidant men is this. A lot of them genuinely do want love. Not attention. Not ego validation. Not casual distraction. Real love. The kind where someone knows their habits, their moods, the weird way they go quiet when stressed, the exact coffee order, the childhood stories they only tell once they trust someone. They want closeness, deeply, sometimes. But what they often do not want, or feel prepared for, is the exposure that comes with being truly loved by another human being. Because real intimacy is exposure. There's no way around it. Eventually, somebody starts seeing the things you carefully manage in everyone else's presence. The insecurity, the inconsistency, the emotional immaturity, the fear, the shame, and for men who built their entire emotional identity around appearing controlled. That kind of visibility can feel unbearable, even while they crave it. That contradiction sits at the center of so much masculine emotional confusion. He wants connection, but not the vulnerability attached to connection. He wants reassurance, but resents how much reassurance suddenly matters to him. He wants to be chosen, but fears what happens if someone truly sees him and stays long enough to judge him fully. So now intimacy becomes emotionally complicated. Not because the feelings aren't real. Sometimes because they're becoming too real to comfortably contain anymore. I remember this woman describing how emotionally tender her partner became in private. That detail matters. Because emotionally avoidant men are often very different behind closed doors than they appear publicly. Privately, he was soft, affectionate, emotionally present sometimes in ways that surprised her. He'd hold her hand absent-mindedly while driving, pull her closer in his sleep, text her random details from his day because he wanted her involved in his inner world. And those moments mattered because they felt genuine, not performative. That's what made the withdrawal afterwards so devastating. Because she knew another version of him existed underneath the distance. A version capable of closeness. But closeness itself seemed to scare him eventually. And honestly, I think part of what frightened him was how emotionally known he started feeling around her. That's the exposure people underestimate. Not sexual exposure, emotional exposure. The terrifying feeling that someone can read your emotional shifts before you even explain them. She notices when his tone changes slightly. She notices when he withdraws emotionally. She notices when he's overwhelmed before he admits it himself. And instead of feeling comforted by being understood, part of him starts feeling emotionally cornered by visibility. That sounds harsh, but it's real. Because emotionally guarded people survive through compartmentalization. Different versions of themselves for different environments. Controlled access. Limited vulnerability. Emotional exits always available. But real intimacy slowly removes exits. Now somebody remembers things about him. Now somebody notices patterns. Now somebody can tell when he's pretending to be okay. And if he already feels privately ashamed of certain parts of himself, being deeply seen becomes emotionally threatening. So what happens? He starts pulling away from the very closeness he wanted. Not because the love disappeared, because exposure intensified. I remember one tiny story someone shared online. A woman said after months of emotional closeness, she casually told her partner, "I can always tell when you're sad, even when you pretend you're fine." And she said his entire demeanor changed after that. Not immediately dramatic, just quieter, more guarded. At first, she thought maybe she said something wrong, but later she realized he became uncomfortable because she saw through him too clearly. That level of emotional perception can terrify people who spent years hiding vulnerability behind functionality, especially men, because a lot of men were taught that emotional self-containment equals safety. So when someone starts emotionally reading them accurately, it creates panic underneath the intimacy. Now there's nowhere left to emotionally hide completely. And honestly, some men resent intimacy for this reason while simultaneously craving it desperately. That contradiction creates so much emotional chaos. He misses her while ignoring her messages, imagines reconciliation while maintaining silence, wants emotional reassurance while acting emotionally detached. From the outside, it looks irrational. Internally, it feels like survival. I remember this internal dialogue someone described after distancing himself from someone he loved. "You should text her." What would I even say? The truth. I don't even fully know the truth. That's such an emotionally real sentence. Because people assume emotionally avoidant men are always strategically withholding clarity. Sometimes they genuinely cannot organize their emotions into coherent language while overwhelmed. They just know closeness started making them feel emotionally exposed in ways they weren't prepared for. And exposure activates shame quickly, especially if deep down he fears he's emotionally inadequate. That fear shows up in strange ways. Suddenly, he becomes hyper-aware of his flaws, his communication issues, his inconsistency, his inability to sustain emotional openness comfortably. Things he previously ignored when relationships stayed surface level. But deep intimacy forces self-awareness. Now he notices every moment he withdraws, every delayed reply, every emotional shutdown. And instead of calmly working through those patterns, some men start emotionally retreating because they feel defective inside intimacy itself. That's another painful truth. Sometimes he believes she deserves better while simultaneously being unable to let her go emotionally. So now he exists inside contradiction constantly, wanting closeness, fearing closeness, wanting reassurance, resisting emotional dependence, wanting her near, feeling overwhelmed when she actually gets emotionally close. And because these contradictions exhaust him internally, he often starts simplifying his feelings into easier narratives. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe we're incompatible. Maybe I just need freedom. Again, sometimes those things contain partial truth. But partial truth can still hide emotional fear underneath it. Because freedom isn't always what he actually wants. Sometimes he wants relief from emotional exposure. There's a difference. I remember.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.